the devil had a yard sale one day. You might be thinking, I went to that yard sale. The devil had a yard sale one day, and this man went to it. And this is the story he told. The story he told was he walked up to that yard sale in the devil's front yard. There was some tools. And he asked the devil, what's all these tools doing? He said, well, these are the tools that I always use. And I'm selling some of them to clear them out to make room for better tools. And so he looked up and he said, hey, devil, what's this tool? The devil said, well, this tool is the tool of anger. Well, how much is it? He said, well, that's about $250 for that tool. It was a nice, shiny tool. Looked happy and exciting. And then the man walked over to the other side of the yard sale, and he saw this long, curvy tool. And he said, well, what's this tool? The devil said, well, this tool, some people call it apathy. Some people call it laziness. He said, I like to call it indifference. When you just get to the place where other people care, but you don't. Well, how much you want for that one, devil? He said, well, that's about $380. And then he walked over to another one, and this tool wasn't very big, but it was the most beautiful tool on the table. Wasn't even rusty. And he said, what's this one? He said, this little tool, it's one of my favorites. It's called lust. Man, how much you want for lust, devil? He said, well, I'll make you a deal, $425. What's this one? It's criticism. How much is this one? Well, criticism, that'll cost you $500. Well, what about this next one over here? Oh, that's jealousy. I don't really know if I can let that one go. I put it out here just to see how much I could get for it. But it'll start out at, it might cost you, I don't know, maybe around $750 for jealousy. Then the man said out of the corner of his eye, one caught him, and he thought, that thing is giant. This thing is giant. What in the world is that? It took up a whole room in the devil's house. What was this one? He said, that tool? He said, that tool, it's $12,000. $12,000. He said, why is this one so expensive? What's it called? And the devil said, well, this one, it's called discouragement. Well, why is it so much? The devil said, because when all my other tools fail, discouragement comes through every single time. When we think about today, don't give up, but rise up. I want you to ask yourself, has any of these tools got you down? Has there been through life and some time in your life that you tried to rise up, but there was some weight, like a big $12,000 weight holding you down called discouragement? Can we just say that a few times? Don't give up. Rise up. Punch the person's shoulder next to you and try it again. If you need to, put the little middle finger out like that, like the girls do. You know, like the girls do when they want to really get you. And just tell them, look in their eyeballs and say, don't give up. Rise up. Don't give up. Rise up. Well, I got a story for you today. In the book of 1 Samuel, chapters 27 through 30. That's 3 chapters. Do you think I could preach 3 chapters today?
Oh, yeah.
It might take a while. An hour per chapter. No, not an hour per chapter. Well, let's do the first couple chapters down. I got the first couple chapters down. It's all about King David before he was king. And King David went through some trying times. You know, he came from being a shepherd boy where he worshiped God, and he was selected as the last son of Jesse. And Samuel came and anointed him, and he said, don't you have any more sons? And he said, well, there's an inconsequential one. There's one out in the field, and we don't call him in for anything. He's not really no good. But Jesse said that's the one that he wanted, and he was anointed as the next king of Israel. And the current king of Israel called him in And he ended up playing his worship for him and doing what he knew how to do for him and rising up through song for him. And it drove the demonic spirits away from the king. The king loved it. But you know, they forgive you in life for a lot of things. But some people don't forgive you for success. And so when it was time for Goliath to be defeated, King David was a worshiper and then he became a warrior. And he was the one who defeated Goliath. And then Saul, eventually, he was so successful as a commander of Saul's armies that he became more popular than Saul. And then things turned around for David. And he had to leave from the capital and be on the road and run for his very life. And he ran from Saul and he hid and he gathered more men to his cause, more men to his cause, more families to his cause. And David was on the rise and he was on the rise and he was on the rise. But he was also on the run. And it's hard to truly be on the rise when you're always on the run. And here comes David and he finally gets to that place where he's tired of running. You ever been there? When you're just tired of running? Sarah talked about that in her testimony today. She was looking for a church, the right church. She was looking for a place, the right place. And she was just tired of running. That's where David was, but he didn't make that same choice that she made. The first choice he made was this. When he got down and he ran from Saul and hid with all of his people for about 7 years. How long have you been dealing with the things that are dealing with you? 7 years where he was. The first thing he did, he was living with the enemy. He crossed over to King Achish's side. And King Achish was the king of all of Goliath's people, all of the Philistines. And he literally was living across enemy lines with all of his men and all of their families and his wives. And he was there and he was living with the enemy at first. And he was in a little place that King Achish gave him called Ziklag. Have you ever found out the enemy will give you a place to live? The enemy will allow you to feel safe for a while. He was living with the enemy. And the second thing he was doing was this. He was lying about who he was. During one of those times, he was trying to escape. During one of those times of escape, what he literally did was he went in to the enemy king, and he pulled his beard out, and he worked through some things, and then he literally acted like he was crazy in order to get out of a trap. He was lying about who he was. And then in Ziklag, he would take his men out, and he would go with his men, and he would go out and he would tell King Achish that he was raiding down where his people lived. He was the right one to go and raid down in Israel, but he wouldn't do that. He would go and raid King Achish's people, the Philistines. He would go and raid them, and he would try to do that. And David was at this place where he didn't want anybody to know what he was doing. He didn't want anybody to know where he'd been. And he tried to hide everything. And literally, when he attacked a little town or a village and they raided, they left no one standing. So that there would be dead men that would tell no tales. They wouldn't get back. And whenever you start living with the enemy, you start lying about who you are. The next thing he was doing is this. He was losing sight of God's goal for his life. Everybody here has been to a place in a time in your life at some point where you really knew God's plan. You really had a sense that this is what God's doing for you. And this might be today one of your times. This might be today one of your moments that you've sensed that today. You've sensed it in the last week or two. And you've sensed it as Sarah's testimony was today and many of the other things with the songs and everything that's happened today. This may be one of those times that in the midst of worship, you really find out who you are. When you see God for who he is, then you begin to see yourself for who you are. And the problem with a lot of people is it's not really that they're doing the wrong thing. They might be doing the wrong thing, but the reason they're doing the wrong thing is because they don't know who they are. They think, what am I supposed to do in my life? What's my direction? And people feel aimless, and they don't have track of God's goals for them. And if they do have track of God's goals for them, they knew it at one time, but then they forgot it. And that's where David was, because when it came time for the king of the Philistines to really bring to bear and try to crush Israel, he brought David with him and all of David's mighty men and all of David's warriors. When it's time for him to really crush Israel, he brought him all with him. He was convinced that David would fight by his side. And truthfully, that was really a make it or break it moment. David was bringing his men to go to war on Goliath's side. Goliath was dead and gone. But he was fighting with Goliath's family. He was living with the enemy, and he was forgetting who he was and lying about who he was, and he was fighting for the enemy's side. How did he get here? And they were lined up about to go to war, and the generals under the Philistines, they stopped and they said, wait a minute. King, this guy's got you fooled. I don't know what he's going to do, but I don't want him behind me when the fighting breaks out. When you hear a story like that, you got to realize this. When you become somebody who's fighting for the wrong side, the people on the wrong side don't trust you. Christians who are compromised really don't get trusted by the church or by the world. And that's where King David was. And at that point, they just sent him home. And I don't know if they were happy to go home or not happy to go home, but it was really a defeated moment. He couldn't fight for his side or the enemy's side. He was stuck. It was like he was really living in that no man's land. And they sent him back home to the little town of Ziklag. See, but he had been raiding these other villages, leaving nobody left to tell the tale. And it was payday. And he went home to Ziklag with all his friends and family and all his warriors. And as they were coming over the hillside, looking down at the little town of Ziklag, where they had a refuge inside the enemy's territory, looking down at Ziklag, they saw a little puff of smoke coming up. And then they saw that some of the houses, well, where's my house? I should be able to see it by now. I should hear the barking of the dogs by now. I should see the children out playing in the yard by now. Go with me there in that moment as they cross over the hill and they get down and looking at the border of their own house, of their own territory, of the place where they had been lying their heads, where the night before they had their head on the pillow. And the whole place, the Bible picks up in 1 Samuel 30. It said, now it happened. Say it with me, now it happens. You ever been to that place in life where maybe you were kind of lying about who you were and you've walked through a time where you were living with the enemy and losing sight of God's goal? And then it happened? What happened? The thing happened? Well, did I cause it? Well, did somebody else cause it? All the Bible says is now it happened. And you've been through times in your life that the it happened, haven't you? Let me see that hand if the it ever happened to you. I don't know if it was cousin it, brother it. I don't know if it was mother-in-law it. I don't know if it was bank account it. I don't know if it was economy it, business it, hurricane it. But in a time in your life, you got to be ready for it to come. And they weren't ready for it to come. It says, now it happened when David and his men came home to Ziklag on the third day, that they found the Amalekites had made a raid on the south into Ziklag. And they had overthrown Ziklag and burned it with fire. But in the time they were out there on the wrong side, lying with the enemy, lying about who they were, losing sight of God's goal, everything they loved, everything they held dear was now unprotected. And they had taken captive the women, both small and great, the important women and the women who were easy to pull aside, the big kids and the little kids. It said David was the one who killed everybody because he didn't want them to know what happened. But the Amalekites who attacked him, they didn't kill anybody because they wanted David to know what happened. They took everyone captive into slavery. They carried them off. Your son, your daughter, your wife or your husband. Have you ever lived this story where the people you counted on 1 minute are now no longer to be counted on? And something had a hold of them and it happened? In verse 3, it says, when David and his men came to the town, it was burned, and their wives and their sons were taken captive. And verse 4 says, then David and the people who were with him raised up their voices. And listen to this verse. It says, they raised up their voices and wept until they were too exhausted to weep anymore. Now, this is getting down to serious business, isn't it? The giant slayer. The one who the women sang his praises. He's good looking and he's bad to the bone. the one that can sing like an angel, right? Has powerful leadership skills and abilities. You know what that tells me? It tells me that when it happens, no one's safe unless they're safe with God. No one's safe unless they're safe with God. It says they lifted up their voices and they wept until they were too exhausted to weep any longer. I won't ask for hands. But on this side of the room, I know you've been there. Here, I know you've been there. And we believe in being real at Rivertown Church about things, because until Christianity gets down into the real places, nothing changes. Another way to say it is this: nothing changes until something changes. And if I do it like I've always done it, I'll be it like I've always been it. Nothing changes. Until God gets all the way down and begins to change the feelings in your heart, he doesn't change the attitudes of your minds. And just so your feelings are changed, your attitudes are changed, then your actions will be changed. But David got to the point that he had no more feeling left. Have you been there? No more feeling left. He got to the point where there was nothing left to do. Now, it got worse here. We're talking about don't give up, but rise up. He got to this place and he said he was too exhausted and everybody was captured. And in verse 6 it says, now David was greatly distressed because now the people talked of stoning him. There was 5 chances for him to give up or rise up. The city was burned. He was too exhausted. He couldn't even cry anymore. His family had been captured. You ever feel like you alone are trying to seek God, but the family isn't? Family been captured. The people talked of stoning him. They're going to kill him now. And when he finally does go after them, verse 9, it says, so David went and he took 600 men with him. And in verse 10 it says, David pursued them all the way to a place that was a valley, the brook of Besor. Remember I told you before, like today is a mountaintop moment, you can see things. But it's in the valley you grow things. And you got to become not just a mountaintop Christian, but a valley Christian. I got to be able to see things and grow things. You can't grow things until you start to go back and see things. It always works together. But he got down in the valley, and then he had 600 men, and 200 of them, it says, they were too exhausted to cross the brook, and they couldn't go on anymore. Have you gotten to that place ever where you were going, and then the people that were going to help you now weren't even helping you anymore? 5 chances to give up or rise up. Burned with fire, too exhausted. His family captured. He was going to be stoned. And then 200 of his men ran away and wouldn't help him any longer. Everybody's your friend when you're winning, right? And you find out who your friends are, you find out who God is, and you find out really who you are when you're not. Well, how do you rise up through this? I've taken you all the way to the brook with the 200 deserters, the 200 that stay behind. How do you rise up in a time like this? How do you rise up instead of giving up? Well, in verse 7 it says, David said to Abiathar the priest, well, he went back to church, right? He went and talked to the preacher after service. He came down to the altar during that time. He came early. He stayed late. It was time to get back in business. And we talk about the fall in our fallback service coming. We talk about, falling back into love with God, falling back into community with people. So David fell back onto what was real and what was right. And he said to Abiathar, he said, please bring me the ephod. Say it with me. Say, bring the ephod. What is an ephod? What is an ephod? Ephod is something a priest would wear. David the worship leader, David the warrior. But bring me the ephod. The ephod was something the priest would wear in the Holy of Holies. It was a long linen vest that started at the shoulders. It was made out of white linen, woven in with gold thread, blue and purple images and detail in it. It's beautiful. Right here in the front, it had 12 stones representing all 12 tribes of Israel. 12 stones representing 12 tribes. I got to think about David. Not only was he at that place where he was ready to worship again. He had to find a way to rise up. But in order to do that, he said, bring me the ephod. Bring me the ephod. I got to have a different tool. If discouragement is the tool that's the most valuable that works when everything else fails, that's giving up. Then a place of coming before God, clothed in God's garments, with God's will and God's way, with the stones that represent the people here. And it wasn't even really where he was supposed to be able to wear the garments of the priest. But desperate times call for desperate measures. And he was so desperate, he was willing to do something different. He was so desperate, he was willing to do something different. He was so desperate, he was willing to break some of the rules that people had thrusted on him all his life. He was so desperate, he was willing to break out of a tradition and a way of doing things. Anybody here ready to break out of a tradition and a way of doing things? If it really meant that you could rise up instead of giving up? Anybody here ready to break out of an old way into a new way? Then say it with me, say, give me the ephod. I've got to worship. Give me the ephod. It's what I have to do. It's what I have to do. Keith came up here today. He spends a lot of time in the gym with his earphones on, worshiping God, lifting weights. Casey came up here today with the silks. She spends a lot of time climbing and rising up. Don Tipton's here today doing videography today. He spends a lot of time with that. And so when it's time to do something, you got to get your tools. What are your tools to do something for God? What is it? It's your habits that you always do. And how can your habits that you always do become the worship that you always live? How can your habits that you always do become the worship that you always live? And I'm looking out here today, and I don't know what your ephod is, but I know what some of your ephods is. I've seen you do it. And the more you do what you know how to do, the more God will do what you don't know how to do. The more you do what you know how to do, the more God will do what you don't know how to do. And David walked in and he inquired before the Lord, because the purpose of that tool of worship, the tool of encouragement that he had, was to find an answer from God. A lot of people don't come to church because they think going to church is just sitting in the chair looking and watching someone else, because this is the environment that we're in sometimes of teaching and worship. But there's a man here today that got on a bulldozer one day and cleared the whole field when it was nothing but knocked over trees. It was ugly. There's a man here today that came out and striped the whole parking lot when it was nothing but ugly. There's somebody here today that gave just the right amount of money to fund that basketball goal out of their father's inheritance when he passed away. The neighborhood kids come. They're out there. That's an ephod, right? That parking lot being striped, that's an ephod. Yesterday morning, when it was time to put all the mulch out on the playground and people just showed up, that was an ephod. When you lead and teach and set up chairs, that's your ephod. Ma'am, when you're cooking dinner for your family, that's an ephod. When you're deciding who to date and who not to date, that's an ephod. When Sarah said, and I took my relationship to the next level, we went from where we were to being married before God. That's an ephod. And the rest of it says this. David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this band of raiders? David had his ephod, but he was ready to take that ephod off. And guess what? You can have more than one ephod. He took off his worship ephod and put on his warrior ephod. Maybe that's where you need to be today. Maybe you're here today in this worship ephod, but it's time to rise up with the warrior ephod. And he says, shall I pursue this band of raiders? Will I overtake them, Lord? Before he took off running, he rose up to heaven and asked God the question. A lot of people, they don't do ready, aim, fire. They just do fire, fire, fire. Or they might go ready, fire, or ready, aim, and never fire. David went ready, aimed his inquiry at heaven before he ever fired. Check this out. He was not going after his family until God said, it's time. It was his wife. He wasn't even going after his wife until God said it was time. He wasn't going after his children until God said it was time. Because he's finding out this along the way. If I do everything I know how to do, if I do everything that I think is right, unless God does it, it'll fail every time. It's better to sit and wait than get up and work. When getting up and work, all it does is satisfy your anxiety and never gives you success. We got to learn how to not only do, but be. Your worship ephod is this before God. It's the same. It's the inquiry within your warrior ephod. Verse 10 says, but David pursued the Amalekites, he and 400 men, for those 200 were too exhausted. There were thousands of Amalekites that came. He was down to himself, and how many? 400. And since you're not a military leader, you might be down to you and not 400, but just you and 4. But before it was him and 400, it was him and God. Before it was him and 400, it was him and 600. And truly, God would have given the miracle if it was just David. Because it doesn't matter who's with you, it matters who's in you. How do you rise up? What I'm talking about this today is this. How do you rise up? First, you have to look for it. What do you do? How do you find your ephod? How do you find your step to climb on? How do you find your silks to climb? How do you find your muscles like Keith? How do you find your crane? What do? See, if you look for what's going wrong, you will always find it. If you look for what's not happening right, you will always find it. Well, the devil's attacking me. The devil doesn't even need to attack you. You're attacking you. If you look for what's going wrong, you will always find it. But God will never leave you forsaking without at least something, an ephod to start with. You got to look for it. Now, in verse 11, it's not just looking for it on the inside with the ephod and with his worship and asking God for the answer. There was something else. Once he found it inside, then he found it outside. Once he believed it, others believed it. Because every door and every road that doesn't lead to hope is always a dead end. Unless it leads you to hope, it's a dead end. And then he goes in verse 11, it says, as they're pursuing, after he had already lost the 200, what if he would have stopped and said, I don't have enough people. I don't have enough resources. One of our engines of hope is this. I will always have the resources to do what needs to be done. It says they found an Egyptian who had collapsed in the field and brought him to David. And they gave him a piece of bread. He ate it. And they gave him water to drink. And they gave him a piece of fig cake. He gave him 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his energy returned. And for he had not eaten bread or had any water to drink for 3 days and 3 nights. David said to him, to whom do you belong and where are you from? He said, I'm a young man from Egypt. I'm a servant of an Amalekite. He was left behind, left for dead. He was on the enemy's side, but as soon as he changed and began to work on God's side, the enemy began to serve him. He found this Amalekite. It was a servant of the Amalekite who came. And when that devil abandoned him, like the devil abandons many of your friends sometimes, like you felt like the devil just left me here. And he said, he picked him up and he said, I'm a young man, a servant. I fell sick 3 days ago. We made a raid on the Negev, on the south, which belongs to Judah, and we burned Ziklag with fire. You did what? We burned Ziklag with fire. Did you say Ziklag? Did you see my wife when you were there? Did you burn my house? How many of you would have just put the sword to him right at that moment? But David knew this secret. When you're on God's side, even your enemies are made to serve you. But you got to look for it. It might not be your enemy, but it might be someone who serves up under your enemy. You got to look for it inside, and then you got to look for it on the outside. David says to him in verse 15, will you take me down to this band of raiders? Swear to me by God that you will not kill me, the man said, and I will take you down to my master, and I'll bring you down to him. We talked about where's your ephod? What are you going to stand on to climb? But I got to ask you this too. Who's your Egyptian? Who's your Egyptian? Well, the Egyptian wasn't his family member. Wasn't even his friend. Wasn't from the same social standing. Had never been a king. Didn't have any degrees. Listen to this. Was of a different race and was an immigrant from a different nation. Too many times we think people don't have anything to offer us. But if you will look for the tool to rise up, you can find it inside, you can find it outside. Next is this. It says when David brought him down to the Amalekites, they saw the whole band spread out all over the valley. And they saw the spoil, everything that had been taken from them and their village before it was burned. Can you see them now peeking up over the hill, laying down like this, like a soldier would do? Peeking up over the hill, it says, I see your wife, David. Hey, buddy, I see your son over there. We're going to the enemy's camp, and we're going to take back what he stole from us. We're going down to the enemy's camp. We're going to take back what he stole from us. What has the enemy stolen from you? What's been taken that's caused you to be in that place of discouragement? Made you feel like giving up? And you might be sitting here this morning and you're just in neutral. You bought that apathy. And not just look for it, but number two, you got to lead from it. Which means once you find the step, you've got to take it. Once you find the silks, you got to climb it. Once you find the bar, you got to do what? Lift it. Once you find the song, you've got to sing it. There's something real powerful in that. Not just look for it, but lead from it. What can you do with what you've been given to rise up? Then in verse 17 it says, then David and his men who struck him in battle, and they went down and they fought from daylight till dusk. And everyone escaped, that they recovered, and they got everybody back. And it says in verse 19, nothing of theirs was missing, small or great, sons or daughters, spoil of war, or anything that had been taken. And David recovered it all. David recovered it all. Can you put your name there for a minute? You say, just say it to yourself. Jonathan recovered it all. It's okay to talk about yourself as long as you listen to yourself. You say it with yourself. Bobby recovered it all. You say to yourself, Jeff says to himself, Jeff recovered it all. Matt says to himself, Matt recovered it all. James says to himself, James recovered it all. If in my heart I say I look for it. I look for it on the inside, then I start looking for it on the outside. I don't care where it comes from. As soon as I get a step, I'm going to take it. The old folks used to say that it's nothing but a step for a stepper. You got to take a step when you get a step. A step on the inside, the ephod. A step on the outside, the Egyptian. Where's your ephod and who's your Egyptian? Look for it. And then lead from it. And lastly today, love it. Can you love it? Because only loving it, I'm able to say, David recovered it all. David recovered it all. I'm going to switch it up here. The ladies. Daisy recovered it all. She's sitting next to him. She recovered it all. David recovered it all. There's another David. Oh, man. Back here in the back. You recovered it all. Back here in the back, you recovered it all. But today, you can stand up in church, but that doesn't mean you're rising up on the inside. There's this one critical moment in the story I haven't talked about yet. I want the worship team to go ahead and come. See how good they are? There's this one critical moment. And it says in verse 6, but David encouraged himself in the Lord. No one can encourage you if you don't first encourage yourself. I mean, they can hold up the match, but you've got to give the fuel. In fact, it's good to hold up the match to somebody. I love holding up match to people just to see if they're flammable. You know who? There's a man who's flammable right here in the front row. Johnny is flammable. I hold up a match every time I hold up a match to Johnny. He's flammable. Are you flammable today? Will you encourage yourself in the Lord? Do you love it? Do you love encouragement? Do you love rising up? Because there's a moment in life where you got to be able to say this. I've won battles before. I'll win them in the future. But I'm going to look for it, how to rise up. I'm going to lead from it. I'm going to take action on it. And I'm going to love it so much that I won't have to get back to this place again. I'm going to encourage myself in the Lord. I'm going to encourage myself in the Lord. What am I going to encourage myself with? I'm going to encourage myself with my ephod. I've heard men say all the time, man, I get close to God when I go out on Sunday morning on the boat. That's good. Just go out really early before church. Man, I get so close to God, I go out in the hunting stand and I don't even care if I shoot anything. That's a lie. But I don't care if I shoot anything. But I'm close to God. That's my ephod, right? But one ephod doesn't take the place of having two ephods, right? This is a community ephod. It's this and your own personal. You encourage yourself in the Lord. And here's the sad truth about it. When you don't encourage yourself, you discourage the people around you. I've got to go back with those engines of hope and say, there's always a solution. I'm always going to have the resources to do what needs to be done. I'm going to thrive no matter what happens. I'll always have the resources to do what needs to be done. I'm going to thrive no matter what happens. And the last one, all my mistakes will be turned to good. Because how easy would a David have been to say this? If I would have never come over here to the Philistines' lands, my family would have never been taken. I've just got to lay down and take it because God's doing this to me. Let me tell you this. If you feel like giving up today, if you have given up, the things that have pushed you into giving up, God didn't do that to you. The Bible says, then it happened. God didn't do it to you. You live in a world where it happens. You live in a life where it happens. And I got to be ready for the it's that happen. God didn't do that to you. Well, he could have stopped it from happening. If he would have stopped it from happening, you would never learn how to rise up instead of giving up. Because when you stay discouraged, there's a vibe, there's an energy that comes off of you. I know because I got one of the biggest energies around. And when I'm giving up, I infect people with the virus of giving up. When I'm not looking for it, I can't expect the people around me to give it to me. That's one of the hardest lessons in life. And when I'm not leading from it, I can't expect somebody else to lead me to it. They can lead me to water, but they can't make me drink. Are you looking for it? Well, that's an Egyptian. I don't even know that person. Well, if it's going to be us four and no more for the rest of your life, you'll never get them back. You'll never recover it all. Can you take encouragement? Can you take the power? Can you take rising up for people you don't even know? People don't even know yet. Somebody said to me last week, I love coming to church, but I'm battling things on the inside because there's people pulling me away. I said, there's hundreds of people here at church with you this morning that they just want to know you. You just don't know them yet. They're a different group of people. They're people too. They might be your Egyptian, but they know where your family is. They might be your Egyptian, but they know where hope is. They might be an Egyptian, but they know how to come back. Would you stand up with me for a minute as we close today? There's a prayer altar on either side today, and I want to just open those to invite you today to come and pray, to rise up. If you've been feeling like giving up, the qualification for the altar today is this. Have you ever felt like giving up? And instead of giving up, you're going to rise up today. But here it is. If I brought in a big hot air balloon, which honestly, that might be our next thing. I'd like to find one of those. Big hot air balloon, big basket on the bottom, right? Can you see it right here? Big basket on the bottom. And then you turn on the flame, right? Remember? All you have to do is hold up the flame, but it provides the fuel. You might want to provide the flame for somebody for their fuel. But if I turned it on today and it started billowing out, and it got to be huge, higher than the crane, much higher, giant hot air balloon, and it was ready to go. That might be you today, just like that. You're ready to rise up. You're ready to rise up. You're ready to rise up. But the thing that would be keeping the hot air balloon from rising up would be one little rope. It only takes one rope to keep the balloon from soaring and rising. See, it was made to soar. It was made to rise. It's got plenty of lift. It's got all the lift it needs. It's just not looking for something to cut, to release it. It's not looking for it. And today I want to come around and find the rope that's holding you down. See, it's not that your balloon is defective. It's that there's a rope holding you down, and you've got to first look for it on the inside. And look down and say, hey, Mr. Egyptian down on the ground, could you cut my rope? I've got a good air balloon here. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to soar. I'm ready to fly. I'm ready to rise up. Today, I want to be your Egyptian. I want to cut your cord. I want to release you because the weights that are holding you down are bigger than the air that's rising you up today. You'll never be stronger in rising than your rope is in holding you down. Gotta cut it. Gotta cut it. Gotta cut it. And for me, the thing that holds me down the most in life is this, is when I don't encourage myself in the Lord. When I don't encourage myself in the Lord, it's far easier to believe it's not going to happen. Today, let's cut the cord. Just ask God in this moment of altar, what's holding you back? Now, what's holding me down? And instantly, the thing that comes into your mind, you just ask him. Said David inquired of the Lord, right? I put a spiritual ephod on you in Jesus' name right now. Ask God, what's holding me down? Because everybody here has something to rise with. Everybody here has something to climb with. Everybody here does. In this moment, just ask God, what is it? What's holding me back? What's my rope? When a submarine is down below the waters and there's so much pressure and it's going to cave in, right? The pressure of the water is going to cave in. It's got to blow the ballast to rise. It's got to blow the extra weight to rise. And so today is going to be a day for you to blow the ballast, for you to drop the weight. To blow the ballast to drop the weight in Jesus' name. God, what's holding me down? What's tying me to the ground? And the band's going to lead us now, and just ask God, what is it? And I want to see these prayer altars just filled today as we're saying, God, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to rise up. I'm going to rise up. I'm going to rise up. Let's worship God. Let's praise him today. Anybody here today want to worship